It's a real honour to be here, particularly as I know you had Jon Snow here recently doing Richard Wolfe, didn't you? And I know.
And he was in last night.
To get Jon to come, you have to book him, I understand, 6 months in advance. To get John Humphreys to come, my illustrious new colleague, it's a full year. And for Sir David Frost, the doyen of Anglo-American journalists, it's an incredible 18 months. Your people have to get in touch with his people a whole year and a half before your event if you're going to have any hope of getting him. Anyway, so the reason I'm slightly late, Owen rang me about an hour ago and asked me if I could come.
So he picked me up at the bar.
Absolutely delighted, yes. Yes. And we picked Gretchen up at the bar, but not in the sense that you're, well, I don't know. Anyway, she was talking to Owen when I arrived. I know absolutely nothing at all about Pakistan. Which doesn't matter. My sort of area of special interest is the United States of America, which I know all of you will agree is probably the finest nation on earth. Well, I say I know nothing. I mean, I do know something because I read Owen's book. In fact, maybe I know an awful lot because I read Owen's book. And that's one of the issues that perhaps we could discuss later on. But apart from reading Owen's book, I know very little at all. But like everyone with half a brain, I'm well aware that if you don't know enough about Pakistan, you really ought to try to know more, because it is plainly one of the most important and also one of the most interesting cornerstones of the modern world. I have another area of special interest, and that is Owen Bennett-Jones. Because we met quite a long time ago, in 1980 in fact. We were students at the LSE, and Owen came into a lecture bleeding profusely from his face. And this was a long time ago. This was the days before knife crime was as prevalent as it is now. So we were concerned about him and asked him what was wrong. And he said, "Well, dear chap, I didn't realise I was bleeding." And in spite of the fact there was blood pouring down his chin, and it transpired that Owen, wherever he was living at the time, did not possess a mirror. As you can see from him now, he obviously does possess a mirror. But I think the thing about his journalism is he has always been the kind of journalist who, in metaphorical sense, does not possess a mirror. And you probably have had people sitting on this dais, plenty of people sitting on this dais, particularly from the worlds of broadcasting, who very much still possess a mirror when it comes to their work. Owen does not. He's genuinely interested in the subjects with which he has dealt through his life, which is why he's had such an illustrious career in the World Service and is so admired within the BBC. He was Pakistan correspondent, as you all know, but he's done an awful lot more as well as that, and he's now, of course, presenter of Newshour and of The Interview. So we're here, in a sense, to sort of major on Owen and on the relaunch of his book, but we're also joined and delighted to be joined by two other folks who will be able to, as George Bush would say, shed a bit of light on this subject. Gretchen Peters, we booked a long time ago, as she alluded, when we were very lucky to get her. We met her in the bar about 10 minutes ago. That's because Ahmed Khan, the head of the BBC's Urdu service, unfortunately isn't able to be with us, but we were delighted. And Owen spotted Gretchen as being someone who would be a more than valuable contributor to the evening, and he asked her to come up, and she kindly agreed. She lived in Pakistan for 10 years, and she's just written a book, which many of you will know, Seeds of Terror, which I think is just out here. It's been out in the States for a bit.
That's right.
And which focuses on the life in Afghanistan, with a particular reference to the drug trade. And it's caused quite a splash in the United States, and surely will do here as well. Aamir Ghauri is a London-based journalist of Pakistani origin, who's worked in senior roles for Dunya TV, which is described here as an embryonic news channel in Pakistan, but has also worked for the country's most watched news channel, Geo TV. So what I'm going to do is ask our three speakers to sort of kick off, and then we'll try to really throw it open and have as broad a conversation as possible without me getting any further in the way. So Owen, can you kick us off?
Yeah, thank you very much. And just a very brief comments at the beginning, and then we'll open it up to questions. So, I mean, the key question, I think, at the moment everyone would agree, is how serious the Pakistan state is at the moment about establishing its authority. and fighting the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, whatever those phrases mean, or whatever the Taliban means. And it's quite difficult to work out. I mean, in the past, under General Musharraf, we had all these years of ambiguity and uncertainty, and he insisting that his men were losing their lives in this struggle, and that the West didn't appreciate the efforts that Pakistan were making to tackle the Taliban. And then back in this summer, a ramping up of the military offensive in the Swat Valley and elsewhere, suggesting that what had happened previously wasn't terribly serious compared to what could be done, and certainly a much more serious fight. But even now, questions as to whether Pakistan actually means it, whether it will be sustained, and whether the fight is actually going to be completed. So that's the sort of central question in Pakistani politics at the moment. And it is, I mean, there are quite good reasons for thinking it won't work out terribly well. I mean, if you take the view that a Taliban-run Pakistan wouldn't be a good thing. And there is ambiguity in the security system in Pakistan. There are many people who have senior positions who are by no means religious extremists, but who are strong nationalists, many more strong nationalists than the religious extremists in the army and the ISI and so on. And they do not see it the way we see it in the West. They just don't see it the same way. And they think that India is taking advantage of Pakistan's weakness at the moment. They think the United States is abusing their ally in Pakistan, and that they're fighting on behalf of others, and that it is not in the Pakistan national interest. So there is definitely an element within the security system that thinks that way, and it's quite a big element. I mean, I think last summer, when the Taliban got within a few miles of Islamabad, those people began to lose the argument, and those more liberal voices within the security system were able to make their points with more force. But nonetheless, that argument clearly still goes on. And you also have to wonder if Musharraf, who basically is a pretty Western-minded man and was governing as army chief, with much more authority than Zardari has as a political leader, if he failed to get a serious battle underway with the Taliban, how much more difficult must it be for a civilian administration which is weak politically and which doesn't have control of the army in the way that Musharraf did? How much more difficult must it be for Zardari to do it? On top of which, this is clearly going to be a very long campaign. I mean, even if you accept, as I certainly do, that the number of Pakistanis who support the Taliban is a very small percentage of the population, it is a huge population. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of people who share the ideals of these pretty extreme religious guys. So there is a very big force to be dealt with, and it will take years. And whether the state has the willpower and the sustained willpower to do it is genuinely an open question. And I can see there are lots of reasons to think it won't work out. I mean, all we can say is, to date, and I thought this, I don't know if you'd agree, but this, one of the questions in the last month or two has been, okay, this campaign's going on, but none of the big names have been killed, which is true, or captured. And then Bayatullah Masood, the leader of the Taliban alliance, was killed, but by American missiles, maybe with local intelligence, but maybe not with state. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, someone may have got the reward money for doing it, in which case it wouldn't have been a state intelligence helping the Americans to do that, and we don't know the degree to which the Pakistani state was involved in that operation. However, in the last few days, these arrests in the Swat Valley of some very serious, first to the Premier League Taliban leaders, suggest to me that the state is getting super serious about this. They actually mean to win. And I think that's really the first clear evidence we've had since, after this SWAT operation, which happened in the summer when they deployed tens of thousands of troops and clearly were serious about clearing that valley, to now have this news that they've actually arrested some very serious senior Taliban leaders and are holding them, suggests to me that it is a serious campaign. But I think that is the open issue at the moment, and I don't know whether you both agree that it looks to me that this fight for the next few months is going to be done in a very serious way.
Question.
Well, I think that I follow, there are a number of websites and blogs that are, that appear to support this nationalist element within the security services, and which I tend to follow because it helps me understand what this crowd is thinking. And one of the things I find interesting is that there still appears to be an attempt within the Pakistani security infrastructure to separate the good Taliban from the bad Taliban. And the Batullah Masood and the TTP, which is the Pakistani Taliban movement in its Urdu acronym, is consistently considered or referred to on these websites and in the statements by the Pakistan military as the fake Taliban. They even go so far as to suggest that India is behind this Taliban, which is sort of sweet in a way, but and possibly not entirely unrealistic. But the Swati Taliban, Mullah Fazlullah, they're convinced is another fake Taliban, and you hear this all of the time. And these websites will also continue to say that, you know, Jalaluddin Haqqani, who the Americans have been trying to take out from his base in Miramshah, is really not such a bad guy. He was quite a good Taliban, he was quite a good mujahideen. He even worked with the CIA quite closely. Can't we all learn to get along with him? Shouldn't Hekmatyar be brought into the political equation of dealing of, couldn't there be a political solution with Hekmatyar? And so there is this constant, and I'm not trying to throw out a bunch of random names of people, crazy people who live along the border, but it does seem to be this attempt by the Pakistani security services to separate the good Taliban and the bad Taliban, and to me that reflects an intention to try and, you know, essentially juggle a hornet's nest, which I think was reckless policy when the Americans pursued it in the 1980s. I think it continues to be reckless policy for the Pakistanis, and I think I would only go on to say that I do think that the concerns in Islamabad and Rawalpindi that New Delhi is trying to destabilize things further are not completely unfounded. And I think one of the things that the Western governments could and should be doing right now would be to put some pressure on India to try and ratchet back the pressure so we could refocus the Pakistan military's attention on the common enemy that we all face. So,
Aamer.
I don't know, means I'm, you know, confused and clear at the same time. I'm clear that, you know, nothing has changed in Pakistan in the last 30, 40 years. Pakistan is as confused as it was. Balochistan was up in the arms in the 70s, even in the 60s. If they are up in arms now, nothing has changed. Afghanistan is at war with itself and, you know, definitely in the region since 79. So Pakistan has been fighting the war for the Americans and now again for the Americans. Nothing has changed there. I think, you know, Pakistan Army has changed in a sense that up till 98, when our bomb was not out in the market and not everybody knew that we have a bomb, we don't have a bomb. Pakistanis needed Americans on their side. Now, I might be extremely wrong, but my feeling is that, you know, Pakistan seriously believes that Americans will not last here for very long. Give it, you know, a couple of years, Obama will be heading towards his last year in the, in his presidency. Americans will have lost a lot of people. British have lost a lot of people. The rest of the Western world, you know, does not want to be in Afghanistan. So if Americans are, you know, basically are seen to be losing here, this region will be left the way Pakistan actually wants to run it. They know that Iran is playing, you know, pretty solid game with the Americans. They are talking to them. They are on board. They are not on board. Russians and Chinese, you know, will definitely like America to be seriously beaten in this. Pakistan is only concerned how India will play out, you know, and that's why whatever they are fighting in this region, we are fighting the American war. Okay, fine, you give us money, we give arm, and for that reason, you know, I think they're doing a pretty solid job. You know, losing their men here and there, Swat. I personally believe that that was an operation which was created for the Western world. Fazlullah or his son or father-in-law or whatever, the Premier League guy was recently caught, Muslim Khan. Our report was that he was in Islamabad for 8 days, negotiating with the guys. Whether the negotiation was happening in Islamabad or in Mangora, we are not, clear. But the thing is, when his associates have spoken to the Pakistani media, that listen, Muslim Khan and his 5 associates were in Islamabad trying to cut a deal about Swat. We feel that something seriously wrong has gone in Islamabad. They have been detained. So that's why we're talking to the Pakistani media. Media, broke out the story first, and then the military went ahead and said, oh, yes, we have arrested him. And that's why we said arrested or detained. Maybe that was ruse to speak to senior guys like Fazlullah or Sufi Noor or whatever his father-in-law's name is. I think, whatever was happening in Swat was not as serious. I know Pakistan Army has lost a lot of men there, middle-ranking soldiers. But, again, the way earlier mentioned, confusion about who Pakistani, Taliban are, whether Baitullah and people who have associations with Al-Qaeda and have a wider agenda, and then the Swat people who actually want to work within the confines of the Pakistani constitutional apparatus. They are seeking the Sharia. They are not against Pakistani state per se. They said that, we actually want to run like mullahs. Just let us be like mullahs. We want to do this, that, whatever. Shut, music shops, kill women, whatever. Thank you very much. But we are not against the state. Baitullah Masood and his associates were fighting a different war.
State.
So I agree with what Owen said, that confusion, ambiguities are there. But behind it, I think Pakistani state is pretty clear what it's doing. And they know that, the West is losing time, men, money, patience as well.
Mm-hmm. But what would the effect be if the West was to lose those things and then decide, or without deciding, simply intellectually, mentally, physically, to withdraw? So in terms of boots on the ground in Afghanistan, but also in terms of diplomatic involvement and aid and all the rest of it, what's the effect of that if that happens?
If you look at the amount of aid which Pakistan gets from the Americans, frankly speaking, 1.5 million per year, maybe over the years, 7 million over 7 years. Compare it with other, it's frankly speaking, Pakistan is still not sure, Pakistanis, where the money comes in, where it goes. A lot of money goes back to the Americans, their projects. It does not come to the state itself. Pakistan cannot say it, again, this is my personal opinion, Pakistan cannot say it openly because of its long association with the Americans and with the West, that they're waiting for China to stand up in this region. They're pretty close with Chinese. China does not have that sort of ambitions like the Americans. And Pakistan has, somehow this confidence that if China tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years time, start asserting itself, even Indians will face the pressure that, India is somehow, literally feel claustrophobic. If you minus the factor of the Indian Ocean, in China, which is sitting on its head, there's a nuclear Pakistan on its western border. India actually wants to open up. The scheme of things will change, dramatically. Iran is not pro-America, if it becomes nuclear. So, a lot of things will change this region. And Afghanistan, nobody needs Afghanistan for that matter. But Pakistanis actually want it as whatever the army used to say, strategic depth, etc., Pashtun factor, Tajiks and Northern Alliance, cannot do anything in Afghanistan if they are not heavily funded by the Americans or by the actors which are not regional actors.
Yeah, I'd just say on the foreign aid, I can take the point fully that a lot of it's gone to the military and a lot of it's probably gone back to the United States, but it is a huge sum of money. Since 9/11, it's not 1.5 million, it's probably, it's certainly over 12 billion and possibly 20. So it is a vast, it's more than Israel gets. It's huge money. And no doubt, some of it's been ploughed back to the States and consultancy fees and all the rest of it, but nonetheless, it is quite a serious sort of thing for the Pakistani government to give up. However, you can certainly say, in terms of what would happen if the West gave up, there is no one in Pakistan who believes the West can win in Afghanistan. I've not met one individual over the last, ever since the first deployment, who thinks this is going to work out. Nobody believes it'll work out, and everything they've predicted so far has been correct. It is going terribly badly, obviously. So their belief is that that deployment has caused more problems in Pakistan. It's very difficult to disagree with that, that the foreign deployment in Afghanistan has caused problems for Pakistan. Now, were those troops to leave and it became less internationalized, I imagine that the Pakistani state would find more ways of compromising with the extremists. They would try and talk to them, do local deals, try and split them, divide and rule. And I mean, if you take the sort of view that there are about 30 groups within the Taliban, it's probably correct. I mean, there is lots of room for leverage there, for cooperating with some in some areas and clamping down on others and all the rest of it. So it would be a much more sort of classic Pakistani policy of a much more nuanced policy of dealing with the problem without going around deploying the army to shoot everybody. So imagine that's what would happen, and it'd all be fine until there was another major attack on the West. At which point, the West's going to get involved again and say, you can't carry on like this. So that's the basic tension. And if absent a major attack on the West, obviously Pakistan would much rather all these foreign troops left the area and just leave them to get on with it in the way they've done it for 60 years, which arguably worked much better than it's working now. Because I mean, now you've got suicide bombs every week. It is an absolute disaster in Pakistan. You've got civilians dying the whole time. And it is very difficult to find anyone in Pakistan who doesn't believe that is the consequence of having foreign troops in Afghanistan.
I want to open it up in just a second, but I just want to ask one more question before we do that. And that's about the nuclear weapons, which someone mentioned. Where are they? Who controls them? How safe are they?
Well, I mean,
Wish I knew.
They're distributed apparently in many different sites in northern Pakistan, and they're controlled by the army. And there's only one circumstance I can see in which there'd be a problem, really. I mean, they're physically secure, and there have been attempts to breach that security, which all failed. And the only situation I can see where there'd be a problem, which they're very aware of, is where someone quite senior to decide that they'd had enough of the West. And I think there are quite a few people in those positions who do think, it's not impossible to imagine this, given what's happening in Afghanistan. So that has led to these programs which the United States are paying for, where they try and profile everybody, even those who've been with the nuclear establishment for decades, having to go through these tests of loyalty to the state. And I imagine they're I don't know how reliable those tests are, but that's the threat.
And could the United States destroy them or those weapons that were suddenly at real risk?
No, the risk is then there'd be a nuclear leakage and there'd be a dirty bomb in the West somewhere. Yeah. But when the West talk, I mean, even those people who plan these things, whenever I've managed to sort of get close to them, when they concede fully that were they to launch a strike, which they do talk about doing, that they couldn't get them all.
No one's sure where they all are. I think most of them are. Yeah. But no one, I think, is even sure how many there are.
And there are more and more
guesswork, because different sites, Pakistani nuclear sites, are, the way Owen is saying, located in different parts of primarily Punjab, the province. But the thing is, there are nuclear sites, whether the missiles are stored there, whether the bombs are stored there, whether they are laboratories, nobody knows. And that's why I believe that, when the military says that they feel very nervous when the West talks about, on one side you say that, you are our partner, you are, frontline state and this and that. And then, reports coming out of the Western media, or means at times senior military officers, that, this is a concern and these arms need to be taken out. That's the only point of concern. But I think that nuclear, the command and control system is in place. Fully, that's this sad part of the story, that everything is controlled by the military. It's not just the nuclear arm. The whole state is controlled by the army. That is the sad part. They are not answerable to anybody. And that's why when, for example, tomorrow, the fear is that tomorrow if a mullah or mullah-minded general comes into power, just like Zia-ul-Haq, whether he will use this for his benefit or, for some adventure making. We have seen that Pakistan has tested this nuclear doctrine when it went to war in Kargil against China. That two nuclear states cannot go to war, and they tested it, and many generals retired and serving, they seriously believe that. that there will not be a war between India and China now, because we have, you know, and if you're a nuclear state, size does not matter.
Let me throw it open to anyone to make comments, ask questions. Yes.
I guess with the subject being the eye of the storm, we're basically talking about the war on terror, and as from the three panelists, I think maybe the lady happened to be the clearest. I mean, we could figure out what she's saying, that the problem is between the government of Pakistan not discerning between the Taliban as an entity and, you know, the good and the bad Taliban. And Aamir has his own view, but the VIP here, who's written so much on this issue, all I could get is saying that it's very difficult, it was very difficult, and what it could possibly be. But I would like to know a little more about what you think is the real crux of the problem. I mean, how would you take the bull by the horns?
Well, I mean, this is a very big problem. I mean, there's an insurgency involved with a popular base of hundreds of thousands of people. The United States tried to deal with an insurgency in Iraq, and after some years, developed much more subtle tactics than they started out with, and by a policy of paying off some tribal leaders, by appealing, trying to split Sunni opinion, and so on and so on and so on, and being more sophisticated about it than they started out being, they achieved some success. The Pakistani state, I think, is getting better at it. You know, if you looked at Mingora, the main town in Swat, after they'd taken it, well, let me start with before the SWAT operation, which was basically this summer, there was an operation in a place called Badshot, which is a tribal agency, and I mean, it was flattened. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I only saw TV pictures, but I mean, it was just, there's nothing above a foot. Whole villages were just rubble. Now, that's not the way to do it. I mean, how on earth are those people going to be loyal to the state when the state's just blown up their villages? So since then, I think Kiani has got it, you know, and he has issued orders saying you can't do that. And in SWAT, that didn't happen. Now, there is a question to what degree did the Taliban actually fight in SWAT? And so, you know, are these buildings all standing because they just actually retreated to fight another day? But I think there was a fight in SWAT, and the army did it much better. However, you know, no one is saying that this kind of operation is easy. So what I'm telling you is this is going to be many, many years, if the state has the resolve, many years of extremely difficult fighting, with lots of deals being done and lots of, you know, attempts to buy off local tribesmen to fight the Taliban for you, and lots of nuanced policy. And maybe then you can win. But this is not, you know, I mean, it is not obvious. I totally accept that the state side is not unified on this. So that makes it much more difficult. You know, if you've got people within the state who basically don't want to do the fight, then that's not going to help. Which is why I think it is an open question how this ends out. But, you know, there is no, I mean, just as the Americans are finding in Afghanistan and the Pakistanis will find in the tribal areas, this stuff isn't easy. Don't know if that's any clearer.
Yes, and then I'll come back to you.
Perhaps I could come at the same question a different way, which is to pick up on the comment that the Pakistani state needs to work out what it's doing so that we can all be on a common agenda. I find it more persuasive that like with Ahmed, the Pakistani state does actually have a pretty good idea of what it's doing, that it isn't odd for it to be distinguishing between different types of Taliban. The distinction is between whether the Taliban are pointing at Islamabad or at Kabul. And that there isn't very much, perhaps, in common with the Western agenda as generally described. And it's not clear to me how much of a threat to the state of Pakistan Al-Qaeda actually represents. So I wondered if the panelists, in the light of that comment, could offer views on what it would actually take, and it's a big question, what it would actually take for Washington and Islamabad to have a common agenda.
Question.
Probably more terrorist attacks, frankly. I mean, I think that I personally, my studies focus on the insurgency on both sides of the border and how increasingly the insurgents are funded by crime. On the Afghan side of the border in the south by the opium trade, in the Pakistan side by kidnapping, timber smuggling, gemstone smuggling, all sorts of things. And this is nothing new or unique to Afghanistan and Pakistan. This has happened in insurgencies around the world, in Colombia, in Sri Lanka, in Northern Ireland. Once insurgencies get involved in crime, it starts changing their intentions, morphing their values, and I think we're in the midst of that right now. And so, to me, I absolutely agree that the Pakistani state had no threat from al-Qaeda before. But if you read their statements this year, they now say that their intention is to destabilize Pakistan. And I think they've done a pretty good job of it in the past year or so. I mean, you could now argue that much of the Northwest Frontier Province and much of Baluchistan are ungoverned territory. And the vast majority of southern Afghanistan is ungoverned. I'm not saying Pakistan is a failed state. It's a very distinct thing. There is now a huge amount of territory on both sides of the border that are simply ungoverned. And those areas become a magnet for criminals, for extremists, for all sorts of nasty characters. And I think that's what's happening. So I do think al-Qaeda has become a threat to Pakistan. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take more violence, more Marriott hotels and Sri Lankan cricket teams and that kind of thing getting hit. And probably, I think that the growing, hesitancy in the West, the fact that there is less and less public support with each passing week in the UK and the United States in particular, the two countries that are doing the heaviest lifting in Afghanistan and putting in the most money, spending the most in blood and treasure, that is in part because we haven't faced a threat. We don't see it, we don't see blood running in our streets. And until that changes, unfortunately, I don't think people recognize that we all face a common threat. And I believe we do face a common threat from these organizations.
Well, I think it would help. Maybe you can add a few when I've done this, Aamer. But I mean, if we just think of who's Taliban, what does it mean? So there's Al-Qaeda, international jihad. There are tribal young men who are either using religion or are motivated by religion to fight the Pakistani state. There are Kashmiri fighters who have been taking on India who are looking for somewhere else to fight because the Kashmir thing's being closed down. There are Sunni groups, there are Shia groups, there are intra-Sunni groups in Khyber. There are criminal groups who pretend to be religious. There are Baluch nationalists who don't normally get included in this, but are nonetheless taking on the state. And then there are all those Taliban in Pakistan who want to fight in Afghanistan, to which obviously the Pakistani says is great. I mean, not fighting here, crack on. So, I mean, it is immensely complicated, and I mean, I'd fully take the point.
And there are three different fronts of the Taliban, separately commanded fronts of the Taliban in Afghanistan.
No, so each of those groups I've mentioned could be split into about 3 or 4 groups in terms of funding, leadership, and membership. So, it is a proper insurgency in which there are all sorts of people for different reasons.
Sorts of goals.
With different objectives. And some of those objectives the Americans share with the Pakistanis, and most they don't. I mean, the American carers of Baluch nationalists are having a go, or indeed if Kashmiri fighters are taking on someone killing policemen in Peshawar. It doesn't matter to the Americans at all. So I mean, there are different objectives and I don't think it'll ever be resolved. I can't see. I mean, while I see that some elements of these are a common threat, I can't see that it'll ever coalesce into one unified campaign.
Well, no, I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that they're unified at all. In fact, I compared the different groups on both sides of the border to different mafia families. Sometimes they fight each other, sometimes they collaborate, and it's usually over money. Sometimes you'll have a case of different factions of the Pakistani Taliban fighting each other, or sometimes it will be the Uzbeks fighting the Pakistani Taliban in Waziristan.
All the foreign fighters, another group. Yeah.
Other times it will be commanders from the same front of the Afghan Taliban fighting each other because and it's usually, in my studies anyway, I've usually found that there's some financial element to it. Somebody wants a bigger slice of the pie. So I compare it I think a more useful description is not that we're fighting a unified insurgency. It's not at all unified. But it's a grouping of in many places a very fractious grouping of they basically behave like criminals, but they have ideology at their roots still. Some of them are losing their ideological roots and are just in it for the money. It's where they're changing. They're changing very, very fast, and that's my interpretation of it, and to that end, they become a common threat because if you can't just selectively say, well, we'll just get rid of those fellows, but those guys aren't so bad. There has to be law and order and good governance in all these regions, and that's going to get rid of them once and for all.
I think the picture which you're presenting is a sort of a Wild West, and Pakistan's West is definitely Wild West. It has been. And for Pakistanis like me, our biggest issue with the state was that we do not need to maintain these Jurassic museums where, we say that the tribals have been living like this since Adam. If these areas, whether we have to be very clear, whether these areas were within the confines of Pakistani state or not. If they are tribal areas, whose tribal areas? Pakistani tribal areas or Afghan tribal areas? If they're Pakistani tribal areas, then we need to actually kind of basically get to these people. We cannot say that these are tribal agencies and this. For British Raj, it was fine. For 60 years, we cannot actually kind of run these areas through frontier crime rules or whatever. I agree that, these might be, all of these groups put together might be trouble. Not for Pakistan per se. That's why Pakistan does not act against the Afghan Taliban. They crisscross between Pakistan and Afghanistan, but Pakistan does not kind of go and attack them. Pakistan only attacks the Pakistani Taliban or the supporters of the Afghan Taliban. Why? And that's why I feel that Pakistanis did not kill Baitullah Masood. I believe that, his movements must have been relayed to the Americans, that you take him out, because if we kill him, we might kind of basically face bigger threat from his associates. They might kind of become more militant against our soldiers. We are already losing soldiers. So if you kill him, so the Americans killed him, 30 people, died with him, collateral damage. It has been happening. And that's why, other groups which you mentioned, they have been operating since 79 onwards, when Iran became, the revolutionized Iran, the Shia-Sunni tensions were being played out on Pakistani street. And I believe that Pakistani, intelligence agencies propped many of these groups up. They still believe that, if needed, they can control them.
Exactly. So the way to look at it is that the sort of liberal view in Islamabad would be that, they would say to army generals, look, they're all the same, these guys. They're all going to cause you a problem. You've got to fight all of them. And the army view would be, no, yeah, that's far too crude. I mean, you can't say the Kashmiri fighter's going to cause us a problem. He's not. He's helping us. And so that sort of attempt to manipulate and control the different groups, I'm sure you're right, it's still there. I mean, but it is much less the case than it was a year ago, undoubtedly. They have taken on some of these groups in much more force. But I'm not saying it's a clear case yet. It's not unambiguous.
Yeah.
Lady here.
Hi, my question is for Aamer. You just mentioned in the talk that we are actually...
Can you hold the microphone slightly closer?
Sorry.
Is it on?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. You just mentioned in the talk that we are quite clear about the fact that America will eventually lose in Asia, and it would be eventually China or maybe India who will take over, or Russia, sorry. In that sort of a scenario, when you think we are clear, I cannot understand that why Americans have been allowed to establish one of the biggest embassy in Islamabad, and they are renting the properties. I'm sure you must be following the news about that in junk. Number one. So, I mean, why they are doing these sort of activities? Are they actually deepening their roots further in our country? Number one. And number two, do you really think, especially when she rightly mentioned that there is a part of the Afghanistan which is ungoverned and share the border with us, then in that condition, when we do have a threat from Afghanistan that they might want to destabilize Pakistan, do you think we do have a group of pro-Pakistani Taliban who are being supported by the military in our country?
Right.
Somebody encapsulate the question.
Yeah. So I mean, there's two questions really. But
Yeah.
first, is there a part of the Taliban that's being supported by?
Yeah, is there anything
military.
known as, especially when we do have a threat from Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Especially when we do have a threat from Afghanistan, that they might want to
Yeah.
destabilize Pakistan.
But your other question was about the Americans and the extent to which they're really trying to deepen their roots.
That's
in,
right.
With the renting of more space in Islamabad, and whether it's realistic to believe that they would actually withdraw any time soon.
That's right. Yeah, that was the question.
Let's take those two. I mean,
When I said we did not mean I, it's the Pakistani state, the army. They're pretty clear what they're doing. We are confused. That's why I'm saying I'm confused. That's why I said I'm confused and clear. We know what Pakistan Army is doing for the last 60 years, So whatever they're doing it because they think that they're pretty clear about their policy. As far as the Americans, throwing their root, Americans have been there, again, as long as Pakistan was there. For 60 years, Pakistan has been run, sadly or, unluckily, luckily, whatever, by the Americans. And the reason for that is also clear because Pakistani military elite, first it was directly, there was a symbiotic relationship between the Pakistani military elite and the Sandhurst, and then now the West Point and the American military academies. Sadly, that thing was curtailed in the late 90s. I think it is going to start because the American officials are now thinking that we should not have left the American, the Pakistani military elite, on their own. This relationship should be, maintained with the West and the Americans. Americans, by just expanding their, embassy or whatever. If you've been to Islamabad, when I was growing up in Islamabad, this road on which the American embassy is, we used to walk down there to go to our university. And three most important, embassies from the Pakistani perspective are based on the same road: the American, then the Russian, and then the Chinese. And now that whole area has been cordoned off because of the American, embassy, and of course the other embassies as well. If few more soldiers come there, 500, 1,000, I don't see it as a threat or the American plan, to take over Islamabad by force. No, they can't. Whatever they're doing, I think I'll give them a bit of a leeway when the Americans are saying that whatever we are doing, this is in complete, understanding with the Pakistani government. We need them for our own, security, whatever. Maybe they do not believe that the Pakistani security forces will, save them if situation comes to that. Apart from that, I don't actually read, too much into that. They have been there. They have presence. So that story, when it broke out, Pakistani media is also going through, a pretty cranky phase. This love of breaking stories.
Marines?
They break their own stories within. I can tell you, when I was working with Geo, we broke our own story at least 7 times in half an hour. And I told my own, because I was just visiting, I told my director news, I said, listen, this guy is not there. If you actually ask him 2 questions, he is not there where the bomb has basically, there was a bomb blast, and allegedly we're saying that, the frontier chief minister was hurt, then his son was hurt, then he came on, the camera himself and said, no, I'm not, my son is not. So we are breaking news. Nobody took that correspondent to task. I said, what the hell were you saying? I said, ask him. He's there for the last half an hour. Ask him the body count. He's not there. He does not know. 7 people dead, 31 dead, 41 dead. So media is going through, there's a desperate need to break stories, to tell the others, listen, we are, superior than you, our correspondents know more than you. But your other question, Pakistani Taliban. I think all these Talibans have been Pakistani Talibans. They've been bad guys, of late. And that is why some of them have to be taken out, because they do not, toe the line. And there are things which I and Owen have been discussing, which we cannot discuss here because it's a public platform. That who is running Baitul Masood, who is running his associates. We cannot say it openly because, we do not know for sure, but our own correspondents in the region have been telling us stories which literally were not only confusing, disturbing. Because we believe as Pakistanis, I believe as Pakistani, that Pakistan, whether military is at stake or not, or threat or not, Pakistani state has suffered a lot. Pakistani society has suffered more than that. And my concern is that, whether Pakistani society will definitely somehow or the other will be able to rectify what has been done, through Pakistan, whether it was named for the war on terror or the American war or the first Afghan war, the second Afghan war. The society literally is not a society. There are different people in Pakistan, and that is my bigger concern. Whether the Americans will leave or not, whether Pakistan will come together as one country, whether we will start saying that we are Punjabis or Balochis or Pathans or this or that, or we are Pakistanis. In 60 years, we have not achieved that. Pakistan is not a nation state. We are groups of people. And these wars in our region, in our midst, and within ourselves, are doing, bigger damage to us.
Yeah, we'll go round. Let's have someone from over here, and then we'll go back to that side.
Maybe I was just going to ask a question about training and support. How much training and support goes on for the Taliban from the Afghan side of the border, from ISI or other state agencies?
You were there? You want to take that question?
Well, we don't know.
Yeah.
What do you know? I mean, what can you say about this subject? That wasn't supposed to sound rude. That was supposed to be...
What do we know about ISI training of... Well, I mean, what we know is that there are some groups, as Gretchen said, in the Pakistan side who are fighting in Afghanistan, who clearly have links, sponsorship of the Pakistani state, and that's still true.
And elements within it. Elements within the Pakistani state might...
Well, maybe more than that. I mean, I've always resisted this idea that ISI policy, when it sort of goes off Western script, is rogue policy.
Right.
I mean, it's ISI policy. And it is tightly controlled by the army, and it does what it's told to do, I think. And so I think when Haqqani or these people clearly have links with the Pakistani state, that is state policy. And I'm sure that has an impact on Afghanistan. So I think it probably goes beyond a situation of, if they fight in Afghanistan, then let them be, to active involvement over the... I mean, I don't know whether that's still happening, but certainly I think that has happened. Active involvement in those groups and sponsorship of those groups. But I mean, this is very murky stuff, and I mean, we just don't know. And I mean, with all respect, I don't think any of us know, do we?
I think, if you look at the Afghan Taliban or Pakistani Taliban, if you look at the history, these guys are born with a gun, So whether they actually whether they know how to, make or demake a Kalashnikov, how can you actually kind of basically assemble or deassemble an AK-47, they can do it.
Strategy, tactics, funding.
You need...
It's not just firing a rifle.
Yeah, you need 2 years. You need 2 years to make a cadet into a military officer. I'm speaking of Pakistan. There have been cadres and cadres of these militants who were trained in the 80s to fight, each other, or maybe the Afghan war. And then if, for example, there are hundreds of thousands of them trained over a period of time, and they have proven themselves, when they were fighting the first Afghan war. Now you do not need, frankly speaking, ISI training them. These are battle-hardened people, and that's why if you look at the losses, the Western losses in the last 8 years, how many have died through the chemical bombing or the nuclear missiles. No, they were all bullet wounds or now IEDs. You know, they are not exceptionally good at their job. So if, for example, you know, this also confounds me when the West, we say that, you know, they might attack us again. I said, listen, if they actually wanted to kill you there in great numbers, if you're there 70,000, 80,000, 100,000, you have lost 200 men. You know, the British, 204, 210, in 8 years. And all of them have died in direct conflict, you know, single gun wounds. Or maybe a truck actually kind of basically drove over an IED, blasted. That's why I'm saying that, you know, the training is basic combat training.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could look at it this way. If you think of the training that went on for the Kashmiri struggle, which was thorough,
yeah,
long-running, sustained, proper military training on the Pakistan side. I mean, what's happening now in relation to Afghanistan, I would have thought, would be much less than that. But that doesn't say...
Yeah, because the first training was everybody spoke about it, wrote about it, was hardly 17 miles from Lahore in you know, Lashkar-e-Taiba's headquarters in Muridke. And when we interviewed, and I still remember, courtesy BBC's policy, I was working for BBC then, I interviewed Hafiz Saeed, and he admitted to me, and he said that yes, we attack Indian soldiers, we attack Indian convoys, that is our policy, but we do not take this support from the Pakistanis. And I said, where are you now? And he said, I'm traveling from Gujranwala to Islamabad. And I said, since when this area has been included in Kashmir? You are driving through Punjab, heartland of Punjab. But the thing is, that interview was done, I can speak now, it's almost 8 years now, at something like 10 in the morning, our time. At something like 3 o'clock, Lashkar-e-Taiba was included in the State Department's terrorist list. And according to the BBC policy, the interview was shut. That we cannot provide, you know,
a platform
to these who are declared. I'm telling you, I was shocked. I said, listen, I got this guy after I don't know how many, you know, contacts, and he admitted, but the interview was shut. So the you know, the training was, you know, they were openly saying it that we trained, and we take on the Indian, you know, military apparatus. But they were different. I don't know what's the connection between them and the Taliban now.
Question, were you about to say something? No.
Well, I was...
Just let you come back, Kate, and then we'll go on. Yeah.
Difference between training and sponsorship? Or what
Sponsorship, Citibank. I'm sorry. I really don't know. I really don't
Well, I mean,
know.
I think for the financing, I think you could... Yeah, I mean, all this is unknown. I mean, I think from the it's all very speculative, but from the financing point of view, I would have thought the Afghan drug crop means there's simply not a problem. I mean, you know more about this than me, but I mean, I can't believe that money is the problem.
There's no money problem.
So when you talk about sponsorship, I don't think there is any need in these groups
mosques,
to get cash. Yeah, they've got the charitable donations and they've got the drugs money. So sponsorship doesn't really, it's arming and it's training. You know, right.
But there was, I mean, it was known in the 80s that the ISI was training the Mujahideen. In the 90s, when the Taliban were in power, it's known that they continued to support them and provide weapons, some money, and certainly logistical support. And what was very interesting for me to live through in the post-2001 phase of Pakistan was after the earthquake in 2005. And we all were finally allowed into Pakistani-held Kashmir. And out of nowhere, I mean, there was this extraordinary aid effort by the American military with Chinooks coming in and dropping off tents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But far more extraordinary than the American effort was the sudden appearance of these Jamaat al-Dawa and all these other groups, these aid organizations that were attached to Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed and all these other groups. And the facilities that they suddenly, within days, much better than the Red Cross and the UN, they had tent camps, they had inflatable boats that were coming down the river with food, they were bringing in doctors, and they were doing it all for free. It was, well, I mean, you know, they weren't going around putting the pan out in these towns that have been destroyed. So for me, there was really no question that these guys have a very good infrastructure somewhere. I don't know where, I mean, is the ISI as an organization supporting it? I never found any proof that from the top, this was a top-down directive. Are elements of the ISI involved? Absolutely. Are elements of other segments of the Pakistani government involved? Absolutely. There's no question that individuals are involved, and probably for profit, for money. Is it a state policy to continue? Still today, is it a state policy to support them? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I want to get a few more questions because we're running out of time. Over in the middle there, and then we'll come to the front, and then we'll go across again. Yes.
I mean, clearly the human cost on both sides is mounting and mounting, and I think my question is, you talked about the Americans leaving and then coming back with another terroristic attack hits our streets here. Have we not lost sight of really who we're meant to be fighting? And my question really is that human cost making the Taliban in either Pakistan or Afghanistan, in your view, question its allegiance to Al-Qaeda and the international jihad movement? We weren't attacked by the Taliban in this country.
Yes. I'm not sure there is an allegiance. I mean, I think the relationship between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban is not smooth or easy. And I mean, I don't think Mullah Omar has much time for bin Laden. And I don't think Bayatollah Massoud, there was this one thing he did where he had some suggestion that he was trying to help their struggle in Iraq. But I mean, basically, these people are fighting their own battles.
But is there then a deal that can be done in Afghanistan where the Americans say to the Taliban, not to junior people who they claim to be talking to now, but actually to Mullah Omar, okay, here's the deal, we will go because we're sick of this, but you must promise us that you won't allow Al-Qaeda to organize, to have training camps, etc. And Mullah Omar and the rest of them say, yeah, we'll do that. And they actually do it. I mean, is that in any sense
Well, not when the Taliban are winning. I mean, you can't negotiate when they're winning. But if they were losing...
But it's at a great cost.
Yeah, but how long is it exactly? They're winning, but can never win totally.
But just
and to achieve that winning post.
I don't know. That was the deal which was offered for the Americans right at the outset. And Pakistani army was still, and the ISI was still in touch with Mullah Omar and his associates. Says, listen, give us time, and we will deliver you bin Laden and his associates. At that time, America was, up for the war.
Lusting for
they
blood.
Didn't listen. And that's why they said, listen, we don't actually want to listen to this guy, Mullah Zaif, who was the so-called, the Afghan ambassador in Islamabad. Yeah. We still remember, the shots, every single journalist was actually out in his lawn, trying to talk to him. But the Americans said that no talks with, Taliban, Al-Qaeda. At that time, we should not kind of forget that Al-Qaeda was given a sanctuary by the Taliban, but Taliban, the way Justin was saying that, Mullah Omar has lost his government, whatever government was
Correct.
it. He must be really angry with that. That for 8 years he's running on a motorbike wherever.
Exactly, I think it's rather different. I mean, I think you could say that any sophisticated policy should be able to split quite easily Mullah Omar from Al-Qaeda, and indeed most of the Pakistani tribal groups from Al-Qaeda. The difficulty is, if there is a Taliban government or a Taliban element in the government in Kabul, can you really take any assurance that they won't destabilize the tribal areas? No. I would think that would be very difficult to buy as an assurance. I mean, I could accept an assurance they didn't want anything to do with Al-Qaeda. I could believe that. The idea that they wouldn't want anything to do with Pakistan, I can't believe. So that, from Pakistan's point of view, is the problem.
Why? What drives that?
Well, because half of them are Pakistanis. They have their own resentments, which are perfectly legitimate. They have lots of social complaints, which, frankly, are very difficult to disagree with in terms of land ownership and their economic opportunities and so on. I mean, they have grievances.
At least that's a
and Karzai has not delivered.
Not from Pakistan's point of view. I mean, does Pakistan see a Taliban government? I mean, Pakistan's conflicted about this, but there are some elements in Pakistan can see a Taliban-controlled government in Pakistan being a nightmare.
So perhaps that's the question: which would be better for Pakistan? The Americans move.
Which would be better for Pakistan? The Americans leaving, with Al Qaeda in some way, sort of,
Contained.
curbed.
Yeah.
Or the Americans staying and things going on as they are?
No, I mean, it's not obvious.
That's interesting. Gentleman here, then we'll go across again. Right down here at the front. Thank you.
It's a question for Aamer Ghauri. You made a comment about Pakistan not being a nation state 60 years on from independence, but is that not also part of the isn't that endemic of a colonial legacy to a large extent, where frontiers are carved out arbitrarily for people who are flown in for 48 hours, as evidenced in Nigeria about the move for the Biafra Republic and so on. I mean, I take your comment, but to some extent, I mean, how would you? It's not about apportioning blame, but how would you?
I think on an academic level, we can definitely go back and revisit the division of India and Pakistan. But the thing is, millions of people decided at that time that they don't actually want to live together, and now even people like Khushwant Singh are writing that it was a must. Whether it actually happened in 47 or maybe later a few years, but it was supposed to happen. I cannot, judge now, 68, 62 years on, whether those millions of people were right or wrong. But the thing is, at least now, what to me seems that India, by delinking with Pakistan, delinking with the region, is getting on pretty okay. For the first time, because academically I can say that, before 47, India never existed as one country. It was the British Raj which brought India together and ruled it. It was not divide and rule, it was unite and rule. Their railways, their settlement, land settlement, whatever, for the first time. Otherwise they were Maharajas, kings, whatever. Now 60 years on, what I'm saying that, in Pakistan, I cannot talk about India, but this endemic debate, whether we are this or that, who are we first, and successive military rules. And I actually asked this question of General Musharraf twice, that whenever military comes into power, the associates they pick up are the worst of the worst in society. They are culturally corrupt, morally corrupt, financially corrupt, educationally corrupt. And I said, would you select any of them as a military cadet in your military academy to be just a soldier? And he said, no. I said, thank you very much. They have been your prime ministers. And that is what the military has done to Pakistan. They have divided us. When we say that Baloch, nationalists, no, they are Pakistanis who live in Balochistan. Similarly, the way Pakistani military has killed a lot of Bengalis by calling them they were Bengalis, they were not Pakistanis. At that time, Pakistan, East Pakistan, and that is why this thing will not solve. But the thing is, Pakistan, even intellectually, the rulers of Pakistan have not moved away or moved on from that experience of division. And that is why maybe constantly they're talking about division, because it's easy. If nothing is happening, okay, we'll actually have independent Balochistan. If this is not working, or we'll have independent Sindhu Desh or independent frontier. Excuse me, even if you divide this country on natural model, you will not go away. You will have to live together. Unless you pick up this country, put it next to Brazil, enjoy, or even Notting Hill Festival here. We'll bring Pakistan here.
We'll go right to the back and then across to you.
Just to move it on a little, I was just wondering, is the Pakistani state responsible for the murder of Benazir Bhutto?
I traveled with her and asked this question when we left Dubai. And this was the question we constantly asked the Pakistani journalists, that we believe that she will be brought back and she'll be killed. And she distinctly asked me on the plane, I said, do you have any specific information? I said, if I had, I would have shared it with you in London before you left for Dubai and then on to Karachi. But I don't think, that Pakistani state is responsible. There might be elements, we will take a long time. We are still not sure who killed the first prime minister. We don't discuss who killed Ziaul Haq, People have started speaking now, apportioning blame. We'll actually have to wait. There are a lot of people in Pakistan who blame directly, her husband, that he might be involved. But the sad thing is that she was one of the two politicians who had actually crossed provincial appeal, had Pakistani appeal. And by losing her, You know, I'm not a great fan of her, or I was never a great fan of her politics. You know, but the thing is, you know, Pakistan needs politicians who can appeal to different provinces, different people. Because if we do not have politicians like Benazir Bhutto and now Nawaz Sharif, military will look like, you know, so strong, so organized, and the country will look so disorganized that, you know, we'll be bound to be ruled by the military generals who are otherwise incompetent.
Owen?
In the book, I try and have a go at this. I mean, you know, the Pakistani state has not investigated it, which is extraordinary. I mean, the Pakistani state is now run by her closest friend and her husband, and they haven't investigated it. And I've asked both of them why not, and I couldn't understand the answers. I just don't understand it. Now, I mean, I'm not going to make the jump from there and then say they were involved. I mean, there's no evidence for that. But it is extraordinary that they, I mean, I go further than that, have blocked investigation into who did it. I mean, you know, people have been arrested for it, whose cases are not being processed, some young boys. And quite interestingly, when the Taliban kidnapped that guy, the Pakistani ambassador in Kabul, on that Kabul road,
Haji Khalek.
their demand was to get those boys out. And that was a Taliban demand, suggesting that they were indeed Taliban assets of some sort. And they're only 14, 15 years old, or something. And they're still being held, and their cases are never, they come out once a year and they're never processed. I mean, it is very unclear what, I mean, I would think that, from my take of it, is having read everything I can on it, that Bayatullah Masood was involved in it, but whether there was someone behind him, maybe.
Let's come down to the front again and then to you, man. So the gentleman here has been waiting patiently.
Well, for the first time, I find Mr. Ghauri's analysis fairly acute. And that's surprising.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I have always thought that Owen Bennett-Jones had a better handle on situations.
That is, whoa.
But today,
This is divide and rule.
Divide and rule.
At its best.
this evening, I'm a little bit disappointed. Never mind.
I'm sorry.
I wish to come back to the to what has been discussed, and particularly Mrs. Peters' comment about if we don't succeed in Afghanistan, then the Al-Qaeda and Taliban will come to our streets. I think, may I suggest that this is something that the Western media, perhaps Owen Bennett-Jones as well, and you and the others that I've heard over here, seem to be propagating in line with our government's policy to justify our involvement in that faraway country. For the simple reason that Taliban have no interest whatsoever in conquering Britain or doing any harm to British. As far as the Al-Qaeda are concerned, remember, whatever spin Alastair Goebbels of this world may spin out, 9/11 was a Saudi adventure. It wasn't started, none of them trained in Afghanistan, in those Al-Qaeda camps that George Bush and Dick Cheney went to obliterate. Remember that 7/7 here was a Pakistani enterprise. Remember that these liquid bombs, none of them is a Taliban. And Justin, you are new to the program, but last Tuesday, I don't know whether you were, I don't remember whether you were there, but I remember.
I think I'm going to claim that I wasn't.
Yes, but I remember that since I switched on the world service at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I heard the bulletin, and then when the Twitter program came, every news bulletin kept on British Muslims convicted, British Muslims convicted. British Muslims convicted. Do we really feel that by doing this, there were about some 5,000 people last Sunday who were marched from Marble Arch to the Trafalgar Square in support of the Al-Quds. Now, I must tell you this, that for the last 10 years, I have been attending every march and every demonstration held in support of the Palestinians. For the first time in my experience, last Sunday, I found that 95% of them were Muslims, with niqabs, with beards, etc. In 2001, when the second Intifada was going on, and in 2002, the Muslims were not out on the streets.
All right, well, you made your point. Did you have a question for us?
No, I just...
No, well, that's perfectly reasonable. You can make a point, you don't have to have a question. I'm not mining for questions particularly. Let me take those points, and I'll get several people to speak just as we kind of sum up, because I know some people want to get away. Lady here, and then anyone else someone over here wants to speak. Yes, ma'am.
I want to pick up the idea that it's not a unified insurgency, and there are fractious groups, and I think you described it behaving more like criminals with ideological base. But what I want to ask is, what is the political agenda, and are there issues like land rights, and what is there to talk about, and what is the scope for some kind of conversation that can move things forward, and what's happening if you're actually knocking out the middle tranches of the Taliban? Who is there to negotiate with?
Yeah, okay, let's hold that thought for a second. And there's a gentleman over here as well, and we'll take a couple of thoughts together.
Hello, hi. A couple of you made inferences to the fact that India's involvement in Pakistan's stability is less than benign. Can you elaborate a bit on that, and is there anything that India could do that would make any progress?
Okay, so let's take those two together. The sort of the political purposes of the Taliban and these groups, and the influence of India. Owen.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, just briefly on your point, I'd have thought I would agree with you to the extent that if you can justify an operation of this scale in Afghanistan, then you could say, why not Yemen? Why not Somalia? Well, certainly, why not Somalia? Why not lots of places? So to that extent, it is illogical and inconsistent. And as for these social grievances, I mean, of course they are acute, and I mean, this is a very unequal society, and that is not just the case in Islamabad with the super rich, but is also the case in rural areas where there are landowners who have feudal powers. I mean, they determine everything in their area, and that is still the case. It is an amazing fact. It is still the case. And in Punjab, that's true, and in Sindh, it's true, and in Northwest Frontier Province, there are slightly different sort of ways it works, and tribal or feudal and all the rest of it, but it is still there. These landowners have fantastic powers, and that leads to genuine grievances. If you ask how on earth do you overcome these trends, and long-running trends in what is now Pakistani society, but run way before that, then the big answer is education. I mean, this story I've used a couple of times of this guy up in Deer, which is now pretty frontliney sort of place, who back in 47 had some bureau, or 48 had some bureaucrat turn up saying, we've allocated money for a school here, and he said, I don't want a school. I said, what do you mean? And he said, come duck shooting with me in the morning, and I'll take you through it. He goes duck shooting. All the ducks fall in some frozen lake. He blows his whistle, all his people jump in and retrieve his ducks. He said, do you honestly believe they'd do that if I had a school? Now that's the problem. There are many people in these now contested areas who still think like that. And so how, even they'll all claim they're building schools for girls, and so they're not. So how you overcome major social issues, I mean, it's not by Western aid programs.
If I can just actually add to what Ahmed was saying, these stories, people jumping for ducks, interesting, but I'm telling you, the state over the years has failed in each and every denominator. State does not provide health now. When I was growing up and I was going to primary school, there were schools which are in our country called the English medium schools, and then there were vernacular schools. We used to call them the yellow schools because they were painted yellow. But they were schools. 95% of today's Pakistan's political and military elite comes from those schools. They were meant for lower middle class and middle classes. No more. That means, the state does not want to provide education. The hospitals which used to work, the district hospitals, the sub-district hospitals which used to work, which usually have basic facilities, an ambulance, an extra machine, no more. So that means in the last, when more money is coming now for fighting in Afghanistan in the last 30 years, the hospitals have gone, schools have gone, roads have gone, the infrastructure, law and order. A normal Pakistani cannot go to a court and seek justice. Cases are in courts for 30 years, 35 years. And that is why Pakistani civil courts are called Diwani courts. Then you can go mad, but not get a justice. Diwana means mad. They're called Diwani courts. That means you'll go mad, but will not get justice. And that is why if somebody throws you, a little bit, maybe only an assurance that you'll get 5,000 rupees, you'll actually have to fight for me. And that is why in the last 30 years, young men have thrown their lives for stupid causes, And that's why I said, Pakistan is a nuclear state, but within the state, the structures do not exist. And if they existed, they have gone. And no Pakistani, and again, I will kind of literally blame only the military rules. And then if I blame the military rules, then the West, which so-called give aids for these purposes, nothing is used there. And if the country is ruled by one man for 10 years, and he leaves with his generals and his associates, the people who come in, they are incompetent, they are untrained, and they are unready to take on the state. So they will make some money because they don't know when the military will walk in again. 3, 4, 5 years, loot and plunder, and walk. And everybody, and it might not be a news, in the last 1 year, so many Pakistani ministers have picked up properties in Mayfair, in London's posh districts. That money is coming back.
One word about India, which was the question over there.
India is, if I look at as two states, India has found its direction. India is going the way the states should go. Pakistan, I think, should start thinking about, less about India and India, the fear from India. Once you have, got your nuclear bomb, the war is out of the, literally out of question. Start thinking about the state, because, we teach in Pakistan that why Soviet Union disintegrated. Nuclear powers, this and that could not contain it. That can be true for Pakistan as well. Pakistan might not break up, but it will be such a sad, sorry state, where people might not actually want to live. And that's why, you show any passport to Pakistanis, and they will run for it, even if it's for an African state.
But I mean, does India have an interest in destabilizing Pakistan?
It would.
I mean, the way you sound.
It would. I'm not actually kind of blaming right. I'm not putting the case at India's door, but India has, after all, they have fought 3 wars. Whoever was to blame for that, the relationship, India, there are still politicians who have not forgotten 47. They still believe, that Pakistan and Bangladesh should come back. I've heard on BBC, some of the BJP guys, they said, listen, when I was born, we had just one India. Before I die, I want to see one India. Why don't you die now? Before it becomes one. So there might be, nutcases in India, but there are nutcases in Pakistan as well who believe that India will break up. Even if India breaks up, nothing will come to Pakistan. So I think, there might be, Musharraf has admitted that intelligence agencies, whether Indian or Pakistanis, he said all intelligence agencies are bad. He's saying it now, after his retirement, in his, when pension stage. Both these countries have a history.
From his flat in Mayfair.
Not Mayfair.
Not Mayfair. He lives here.
I'm kidding.
He lives just
And
over
the
there.
flat is a podgy
In
flat.
fact, here he is. We've got to finish now. So one last brief one, and then we're done. Yeah.
Is the Dari now politically secure? And what, if anything, would change in terms of the government policy towards the tribal areas and the Taliban and so forth if the Sharif boys got in?
Okay, that's for Owen.
I think, I mean, he's got others. The guys now, the British ambassador in Islamabad was talking about, I heard him doing some public thing, and questioning that, how secure is the government? That's very, almost as soon as the government was formed. And my feeling is there's no appetite in the army to take over. And I'm sure they are increasingly running things, but without obviously being in office. And I can't see any mechanism, and he is the president. He's got total control. He's not given up any of his powers. I can't see any mechanism by which he goes, and then Pakistan just say, oh, we'll find a mechanism. But I don't think that is the case. I think there is no mechanism. So I think he's there for his term. I mean, obviously the polls are desperate, and it's not going well in many ways, but he's there. Yeah.
I will slightly disagree. I don't think that he's secure. He's frightened. He's a frightened character, and that's why he's actually running from London to Washington to New York, every now and then. He knows that anybody who is controlling Punjab is 60% of Pakistan, and the way Sharifs are now controlling, the government and of course the politics, he is frightened because his own party has disintegrated. The die-hard, Bhutto lovers are seriously offended for different reasons, that why he has not kind of gone and found who killed Bhutto, and of course they never liked Zardari. So he is not secure within his own political party. People are not keeping mum because of their own interests, and Balochistan is not with him, Frontier is not with him, Punjab is definitely not with him. Army is, if tomorrow Nawaz Sharif says yes to military, that listen, we can be friends again, Zardari will go. It's only because Nawaz Sharif, as a Punjabi leader now, and he knows his political power, and he knows that London and Washington are slowly coming to understand that he holds the power reins. If he says, not to this general, maybe the next generals, they work on them because a lot of them are Punjabi generals. So I think Zardari, is
won't fill his term.
I don't know. I wish I actually had that in Pakistani Indian terms. I have that yellow parrot who could tell me whether he will survive 5 years or not, but I don't. But he himself is not, and his friends who are regular here in London say that we might actually have just 1 year. Maybe we might see an election early 2011, and if they are the closest allies, I don't know.
Aamir, Gretchen, Owen. Of course, better than the parrot is the book, which is here. Staggeringly low price of £10. And embarrassingly few of them. They're obviously going to go very quickly, so I suggest people rush forward. Thank you, our panelists, and thank you all as well for making that such a lively discussion.